Okay. Well, welcome back. It's our last half hour. It's our plenary session. What shall we do with it?
Write another book, Del.
We've got 28 minutes left, Tony. What shall I do with the rest of the time?
All right.
I don't know if people, want to say anything evolving from their smaller groups. There's no need for that, or response to the kind of questions I mentioned. Again, there's no need for that.
Well, our group talked about case study, not so much as clinical studies of one person in the therapy room, as looking at a larger situation, maybe focusing on particular people who are involved in a situation of social importance. And one of the examples we talked about, the name of which I can never remember, but something about if she falls down, it's Anne Fadiman's book about the Hmong in California and a little girl who's diagnosed with epilepsy and her treatment of in the medical system there and her relationship to her family and so on. It's a wonderful, in a sense, case study, but the subject there is two cultures as well as individual people.
And that's a sort of case study of case studies? Or?
Well, I guess when we talked about it, thought about it as a kind of a good model for kind of research that gives us insight into people as well as their circumstances. In addition to that, books written like that. I mean, her book was, I don't know, sold 1 million copies, which makes us in academia a little envious. Those are not the numbers they usually look for in academic books.
I don't know about case study, Dan, but I've been thinking really a lot about this idea of being led by the phenomenon. I think it's just so out of our kind of conception of things. I think it's even hard to know where to begin, but I'm just reminded of years and years ago, I was studying, I think at the SAFPAC University, and a friend at the time was doing some research on people living on the streets, and he came up with the idea that he was into phenomenology actually before I was really that much into it. And he kind of decided that it's just come back to me, to be led by the phenomenon meant that he needed to go and hang around on street corners. and kind of just
ethnography, really, yeah.
Say again?
A sort of ethnography.
Yes, kind of an ethnography, but there's something about the idea of people who live on the streets and then going and hanging about on street corners that somehow seems kind of matched to the situation.
Right.
And then he had the difficulty that nobody would speak to him. and all sorts of things. I mean, it was very lively, and we all used to laugh a lot at his struggles to kind of for people to speak to him. But it's just such a different way of thinking, isn't it? How do we begin? What do we call it? Research? We started to wonder about why we even need to call it research, But there is something about communicating our work to our ideas and our thoughts and our experiences to other people. But I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts. How can we be led by the phenomenon?
I just thought then, Julia, as you were saying that about that person being submerged in the experience in some way, that's what came to my mind. And it reminded me of a lecturer, actually, a nurse who looked at research into street homelessness, and I think she spent like 2 weeks on the street with homeless people, like kind of submerging herself in it. So it just reminded me of that.
Well, it may or may not be related to closely enough to this, but I guess, Del, you and I once were with another group of people who were doing research, and one of the things that was interesting is that they were doing something which I thought, we thought, was much more sort of imaginative. If you remember, there was something, without sort of saying things which are perhaps too confidential for here, but there was that rather than saying that they were going to write a paper on transference or Oedipus complex, there was a young man who had said that his father died, and he'd found a number of things under his father's bed, which made him absolutely change his view of who his father was. And he was busy writing a letter to put under his bed so that his son would find it. And to me, there was something really interesting and fresh about that way of approaching what it is that we do. That's partly my interest, Tony, in your comment about what you're saying about the drinking party. I mean, to me, all of that, I think when I read things, I'm always more interested in whether or not the person has been imaginative, thoughtful, engaged with what they're doing, and a lot less interested in whether or not they have really understood X, or they have really sort of ticked the boxes according to somebody's list of criteria.
Yeah.
I just wonder, Anel and others, is anything to say with regard to the understandings of intuition and all this?
You might need to say a bit more, see if I can start thinking about it. I don't.
I'm just wondering, this stuff like intuition, evidence doesn't sound like something about evidence-based practice, but it seems perhaps very important.
It seems very important that we talk about.
Well, not that we know, not important we have to talk about anything, but a bit more, that I suppose, I don't know why it came to mind, but it did, that if we're looking at our work, one way of looking at it is something about intuition.
Yeah, I agree with that. Am I making a sound? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree with that. I mean, the thing about evidence-based, you might have pointed it out, other people, is that of course it's referring to things that have already happened, and in that sense, it's not future-looking, it's not creative, and I mean, loads of these. I mean, I did one workshop. Keep on mentioning John Rowan today, but I did one workshop with him that was about using metaphors. And in that, he kind of made me really realise how, well, when a client uses metaphors, how that's something to really sort of notice. And then also, sometimes as a client is speaking, your own metaphors arise in your own imagination. Yeah. And I think, like, before I sort of did that workshop, I probably would have squashed those metaphors and got onto another way of intuiting how to respond. But yeah, that's just one example of how using your intuition, and as images arise in your own experience when you're relating to a client, how you can like really seize these things as opportunities. And then there's sort of other sort of maybe more rational, predictable ways I have of working as well. But always, why is that arising for me now? And like kind of. And then, I get a metaphor and, I check with myself that it's not offensive in any way, of course, but, once I've checked, like, I'm going to share this metaphor with you, as you were speaking, it reminded me of such and such a metaphor, you know, or yeah, you know, and I think basically therapy at its best is creative and forward looking. So therefore in creative therapy at its best actually can't have evidence. You know, because it's all, you know, I basically go along with Yalom, who's a great case study man, you know, that you should have a new therapy for each and every client. And in that sense, it's never evidence-based. Not really. That's my view. Yeah.
Observer, you know, I think that one can get caught up with one's client and come out with it within the therapy. But I don't think that one can ever really speak of the therapy outside of the therapy. You know? It's when you're in it, it's different. And I think somebody mentioned Wittgenstein earlier, you know, very much speaks of this, I think. We can't really research and speak of the therapy because when you're in it, it's different. So I don't know, so I'm not sure about, so I'm saying something, I'm not quite clear about the participant observer element of it. I think that there's something very different about being a participant observer in the therapy and speaking about it outside of the therapy.
And in that case, where does a case study go then? You know, because if you, like, it's usually the therapist does a case study on some client, maybe something like that. Wouldn't it be interesting for the client to do a case study on you as a therapist? You know?
Yeah, that is being done. I mean, even in the esteemed journal Therapy Today, they had the column, what is it called, in the client's chair, and that was regular. So you know, and also on social media, of course, you get clients going on about their therapist all the time. You know?
All right.
Yeah. You get
I must stay off social media.
Yeah.
Also,
Yalom's first books, half of it's written by him and half of it by the client.
yeah.
Every day gets a little closer. Is that the right title? Bill? Every day gets a little closer, I think, the title of it.
I'd like to go back to Hamadan and ask you, as an anthropologist, how you rate the significance and importance of tradition and culture, you know, of psychotherapies. Yeah.
I wanted to ask something, and I hope it will not be taken as a playing devil's advocate, because that's completely not my intention. But I just wanted to say that we live in a time when there is a very strong anti-evidence movement in popular culture, from, let's say, flat earthers to anti-vaxxers to people who say we're not going to wear masks because of COVID. And I think it might be useful to think how we differentiate ourselves from, you know, QAnon and all these kind of nutters, you know, while still maintaining the integrity of anti-evidence position.
A very good point.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah.
Can I
Eric.
say something? I wouldn't have a clue how this would play out. So at the moment, it's more a mind exercise, but it does relate to case study. I think I'm quoting Rumi, who talks about to fill a glass, you first have to empty it. Now, case study is actually talking about a glass that's full and how it's been refilled. We actually have a function of emptying the glass, but we never actually talk about how that glass gets emptied, or whether it's beneficial to empty the glass for the client, and in what way it becomes refilled. So it's effectively we've got this story, and actually we've got the alternative story. We haven't got this element of our function, which is how we empty the glass. But I don't know how the hell that would be part of our reporting process or storyline. How do we give that? How do we write that story within anything that we talk about?
I think we have to go back to the history of science, and rather than looking very narrowly at this discourse that calls itself evidence-based and
saying, you know, and disagreeing with it because it's so narrow. We have to look at whether or not it's science and whether or not other discourses that we're producing are science in the broader and deeper sense, because this so-called evidence-based discourse hardly ever is science. It mostly is just accumulation of random bits of information, some of which, you know, amount to extremely crude statistical analyses of a tiny group of people who aren't representative of anything, or so-called meta-studies that compare things that aren't comparable because all the data just isn't gathered in consistent ways. So that's got absolutely nothing to do with science. And science just is knowledge production. And if we focus on knowledge production, we can do whatever kind of research we want to do with whatever methods we favor. We don't have to be caught into this idea that we are against evidence, because there, some people have said that what they do is evidence-based and what we do isn't. We don't have to buy into their language. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Could I just say anything that's to do with statistics is about calculating risk. And in therapy, all we do is take risks. So effectively, anything that's statistical result and stuff is antithetical to what we're trying to do in therapy.
And if I come back also, Laura, to what you just said, but in many ways, lots of people do have to buy into it, don't they? They have to buy into it as clients, and they have to buy it in as trainees and therapists, because that's what they see as the service being offered.
Mm. Well, we just have to offer the service we can offer, teach what we can teach, train our trainees as best we can, and make a living for ourselves. And if we can't make a living by working in the NHS, then we make a living privately. We just have to get on with it. But, and the same thing when the client is in the consulting room and they say, it's my brain, we listen to them and see if we could shift the discourse a little bit. So it's about minds and brains rather than just, it's my brain. And that's, you know, it's a discourse, but we don't have to. It's just about givens. We're thrown into the world, but then we make something of it. We're meaning constructing beings. And yeah, if we're hysterics, we try to prioritize meaning over being. But sometimes we actually get on with being as well.
We talked about in our group as well. You know, the things are different. They're not as different as you say. So the previous speaker was saying, you know, statistics anti-ethical, and we talked about. I mentioned the comment that my epidemiologist friend says all the time, that, you know, looking at things at the macro level gives us information. It's a guide. It's useful, but an epidemiologist would never apply that to the individual, because the individual has its own experience. They inform each other. It's a dialogue between the two. They're not in conflict with each other. I think it's a shame.
Yeah.
Plant our feet too firm.
Yeah, one of my cousins is a doctor in the United States. And as you know, the medical system there is incredibly atomized and private. So he has been doing some research studies at his hospital and then talking on Facebook about it. Because since they don't have an NHS, they're not doing any studies in which different hospitals participate. And so, yes, he's coming up with evidence. It is actually evidence, and he's arguing that people should do wider studies, and it's really worthwhile. I mean, I did my PhD in San Francisco at the time of the AIDS epidemic. There is empirical research that's well worth doing, comes out of activist communities is led by being called by the phenomenon. So yeah, I believe very strongly we don't have to buy into discourses that oppress us. You know, we may always be struggling, but at least we have a go at it.
Well, I'm wondering if that isn't a note that we should start to wind up on. Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing, Laura, you were saying was, let's get on with it. So I don't know, does anyone else want the last word or thereabouts?
I just wanted to say, Del, I mean, one thing that leads to another question, really, which is how do you coexist with notions of knowledge which, by their very nature, lead to people being oppressed?
There's something just quite well astounding, isn't there, about that? I don't know if this is going off on a tangent, but I also want to say that I think we're all in danger of being oppressed. For some reason, this conversation is reminding me about the SCOPED project that's going through UKCB, BACB and everywhere, which for me has a hugely oppressive feel in terms of it appears to be, I'm not sure this is what's intended, to be telling people what they can and can't do as practitioners in a really major way. And I think that it's a hugely problematic thing that will stop us from doing what we want to get on and do. It certainly will stop some people.
Well, I think I agree with you, Julie. I mean, and I think that it's not so much that you know, I don't think, I'm not sure how much this is against empirical research. I think what we're talking about is how to conduct psychotherapeutic research. And I think the idea is about whether or not the evidence-based practice is going to be the only game in town, or already is. You know, and as you're saying, is going to push out any other way of being able to talk and think about what it is that we do.
Yeah. Okay, well, I hope you've met people today or re-met people today that you can carry on the conversation with. This is, and hopefully we'll meet again before our next annual conference in a year's time. But there are other ways we have, and I just make free plugs, if I may, with regard to carrying on conversations. As I say, this started with a crisis at the European Journal of Psychotherapy and Counselling. So if you would like to contribute articles to that journal, or even would like to edit or co-edit special issues, I'd be delighted to hear from you. The two organisations involved in putting on this conference, the Critical Psychotherapy Network, used to meet in, before COVID, which I understand everyone's calling BC these days, in Hampstead, but now on Zoom. We meet on a Saturday morning on Zoom every 2 months. Details on the website, where you can contact me if you want to take part in those. What are really collective supervision meetings. The SAFPAC runs a training where we also take people who are already trained to come along as for CPD. But we also have a monthly meeting which is open to everybody. So you're very welcome should you want to come along to those. The next two speakers we have this term, Michael Guy Thompson, who's talking about the nature of will from California, and Manu Pisano, I think is talking from North London. So that's just a plug for SAFPAC. I would like to end by thanking lots of people, thanking particularly the presenters today including the respondents. Thank you so much for all the work that you've put into this. There are also a whole group of people that I need to mention that have led up to this. I just very quickly mention their names. There's Evren Miavdi, Anastasios Gaitanidis, Jay Watts, David Winter, Laura Scott Rosales, Gory Beecroft, Christian Buckland, Linda Finley, Sasha Lawrence, Seth Osborne, Sally Parslow, who've all done tremendous work in leading to today's event. But there's one person who I would like to mention, for which today would not have been possible, who's been staying very quiet, and that's Gory Beecroft, who's helped me enormously in putting the Zoom elements and the conference together. So thanks very much, Gory.
That's fine. It's been a pleasure. My 2-year-old's learnt a lot.
Hi.
Okay. So thank you so much. There's so much inspiration for me from today, and I hope that you're able to carry on the conversations from people you've met today, all sorts of different things. Thanks very much for coming. All the best for the weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.